Okie dokie. Host to stop video, but I don't really care. You don't really need to see me that much. I'm going to try to take a page from Mr. Curran and learn to speak a little slower than I usually do. This one is similar to the previous policy, relatively straightforward, not nearly as brief, but we can just go to the next slide and we'll get started on it. It's got a long title because it has a little bit of history. It came from the policy experience report that the staff generates. As if you were tuned into the meeting earlier today, you would have heard Lisa give us this meeting's policy experience report, where things regarding implementation challenges, confusing bits to ARIN customers and members of the community get raised. Basically, the experience that the staff has implementing a policy, such that we on the AC can factor that into adjustments, finessing, and so forth. This has already been presented at a previous meeting. It's had a little bit of text massaging as we've gone. And similar to the previous policy, it is a recommended draft. So all the admonitions that both John and Paul had given previously regarding this may be the last time you see it in a public forum, and I'm sure Paul's still going to say it again. That all applies here as well. Next slide, please. So the staff and legal comes from the most recent iteration of the text and raised no significant issues. Basically, we are striking the section that refers to fees in 4212. In general, we have a separation between certain areas in ARIN operations and policy. Basically, all things financial fees, fee schedules, that's all the purview of the board and does not belong in policy. Policy is purview of the community, and we on the AC help implement that as your voice. Therefore, this was sort of a conflict and created some confusion. The intent here, next slide, please. Is to make this a relatively minor change. You see there's no issues on the staff and legal, so next slide, please. This is the summary of the problem statement. I gave a little bit in the preamble. This formally came from our policy experience working group within the advisory council. As indicated, fees are not considered to be part of policy. And we, next slide, please, worked through making some adjustments in a previous iteration. And after some examination and consultation with the community, it was decided that the entire section 4212 should just be struck because it only talks about fees and repercussions. And a highlight here is that when we took this new definition to be added to 2.x, is a sharp-eyed member of the community got the typo for contractual. In general, should typos get past the AC community and the board, they get cleaned up by staff at implementation. But that shows somebody actually read it in detail, so we like that kind of feedback. I'm not just going to regurgitate what's written here. I'll give you a moment to read through it, in that we're simply declaring an RSA exists. It's outside the scope of this document, and we will refer to it in multiple places. Next slide, please. Again, we got a pointer to the typo. Some discussions regarding legacy resource allocations that neither the staff and legal nor the president of the board had hi Chris, yeah, had indicated were issues. And so this last iteration of text only had that feedback from one person. So the question is, do we not have community support, or is it just too straightforward? So next slide, please. We're on to the discussion. and we'd like you to tell us how to proceed. And I do want to raise the point that we have a few other references simply to RSA within the NERPM. So this kind of plugs a hole where those are sort of loose, untethered references. And with the hat of being on the NERPM working group, we've been looking at a lot of these things as holistic changes as well. So they'll probably, if this goes forward, there'll probably fall out to be some additional shoring up to make sure any of those other references are in line with the new definition. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And NERPM, by the way, for those new, is the just the short form that many of us who've been around too long refer to the Number Resource Policy Manual, which we just like to call NERPM for short. And Joe is quite correct. I will remind that it is very important to give the feeling of community support right now, because this is the last opportunity you may have. It may come back, obviously, but it could proceed to the board without another in-person or virtual meeting. So with that, I open up our comments and microphones, questions for our presenter, for staff on this. Again, it's a fairly straightforward one, but that does not mean that the feedback, even just saying in favor or against, is very useful to the advisory council. And then as this is a recommended draft policy, we will have a poll. That's about all the filler I can give. So we will wait for some Q&A. If we don't get Q&A, we will threaten you with John Kern's opera singing.
Chuckle.
Questions, comments, in favor or against?
It does make me wonder whether we need to have less finely crafted policy, because really well done policy raises no comments, as does policy that no one's interested in whatsoever. Yet if you have a defect, you'll get some comments. So perhaps next time around, Joe, you can insert a defect and we'll at least hear from people.
I'll add more than just typos next time.
Right. It is one of the comments we commonly get in an organization that if you hear nothing, you must be doing something right, because trust me, you'll hear about it when you do something wrong. But our banter between the three of us here has now raised 3 shows of support as they're short. I'll just read them. David Farman, University of Minnesota, supports as written. Gwen Newton of DXC is also in favor. Louis Lee of Google Fiber is also supportive. So thank you to those 3. We'll give another 30 seconds for people. And again, I'm not trying to rush anybody. We just need to give some feedback. Oh, it's all coming in now. Frank Bulk of FiberNet Communications and Premier Communications supports. And Donnie Lewis, No Association, also supports as written. Gary Geeson of Central Logic, ARIN-AC supports. Is there anybody who would like to give a reason why they would oppose this, either by raising their hand or give a comment? That would be helpful. We now have also Kate Gary of Net Acute, Acute. I'm pronouncing that wrong, Kate. I'm sorry. Is in support, and John O'Brien from the University of Pennsylvania also supports.
Maybe actuate.
Sorry, what was that?
Maybe net actuate.
Net actuate. Yes, that actually is exactly what it said, and I don't know why my brain couldn't process that. Danielle Carroll, University of District of Columbia, also supports as written. Going once. We'll give another 20 seconds since it seems to calm, the seas have calmed, and then we will go to our poll. So I note, only because I'm looking at the chat and it will close, that I see some people putting in support in the chat. If you could put that in the Q&A. I will just, Brian Jones of Virginia Tech, put that on your behalf, this one, just to, so we can close off, but please make sure to put that in the chat. There we go. Brian put it up officially. Okay, with the microphones now closed, we thank Joe for his presentation. We will now go to a poll. So again, same as before, we are looking for anyone to give us their feedback on whether they believe this proposal as written is something that can move forward or cannot. So if we could have our poll. Are you in favor or against recommended draft policy ARIN-2020-8 as written? Please either indicate in the poll or use the Q&A function only if you are technically unable. Please do not use the chat. We cannot pull the chat. Give another 10 seconds here. Pollers, if it looks like we've studied off, can we get the poll results?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, polls are closed. At the close of the poll, there were 118 in attendance. 41 voted in favor, 0 against.
Thank you. This feedback will be provided to the AC for their consideration. And we will go on to the next presenter, which is me.